Welcome to this week's episode of Predestined Purpose, ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the midst of chaos. Today, I have Lisa Autry here, and she's the founder of the Daughter Diaries and the author of the Real Moms Playbook, which I actually have right here. I'll show you guys. It's beautiful. She's also a productivity coach where she helps work-at-home moms get organized to do well as a boss babe. So a little over a year ago, she fell and she hurt her dominant hand, so her writing hand, during the pregnancy of her third child. And today we're going to be discussing more about exactly what happened, her story, and how that changed her relationship with God and what her response has been during this trial. Okay, so to set the scene, like I said, she was about to have her third child, and this is what was happening before the accident. So you wrote a book, you started a podcast, as I mentioned, and then you were helping women basically organize their lives and just get things together as working moms. So leading up to this point of your accident, you hadn't talked as much about God on your podcast. I made sure to listen. I listened to all of it from beginning to end. So I noticed that, and I noticed the progression there. And so that's something I really wanted to discuss. What was your relationship with God prior to the accident?
So it's so interesting that you say that, because it has been a progression. So I've always believed in God.
Yeah.
But you know, what's really interesting is so many of us believe, and he's just kind of something in the background that you're like, you pray to, and I did pray.
Yeah.
I had read a good portion of the Bible, but I never felt like he was with me day to day, which is just a very interesting dynamic, right? And the December before, my coach was like, hey, you need to read this book. It's called The Prayer-Powered Entrepreneur. And I was like, okay, I'm interested. God had, been calling to me for the last couple of years. I had started to dive into his word and everything, and it was really definitely a transition. But then in January, this is January before my fall, I read this book, and it was amazing. It was really the calling of, as an entrepreneur, how God is the CEO of your company and he is guiding you.
Yeah.
And, even something as simple as pulling out a chair and saying a prayer right before I go into my coaching sessions, or even saying, guide me the best way possible. And that's so different than just God being this presence, but he is really being embedded into my daily life. And so right before I started to really connect with him, and it was like weeks before I was really connecting, and I think it was predestined about what was to happen. He kept calling to me and preparing me, and you could tell right after that it really shaped how I would speak about him and just the way I entered each and every single day of my life. It was very, very an interesting dynamic.
That's amazing. And I think it's really clear that, like, I've talked about this on other episodes before, but God has to change our hearts to be prepared for him. And I see how he does that over a period of time.
Yes.
I think it's more prevalent in some people than others, but to see that change when you're looking back and just to see how that happens is so great. And when he calls us to have that relationship with him, it's so life-changing.
Yep.
And there are a lot of people, like you said, like, it's different to have a relationship with God, and the Bible even says, like, even the demons believe in God. Who is Jesus? Who is he to you, and to you guys listening? Who is he? And he can change your life. He will change your life. And so I think it's amazing to see that happened in your life.
Yeah.
And that obviously, like, as we continue, we're being sanctified and changed. And so that continues to happen.
And that was such a huge thing for me. It's really having that relationship. It's very different. And you're right. Even, the demons know he exists.
Yeah.
Like, so many of us know he exists. And that's the step. And then changing your heart.
Yeah.
And that's really what happened. It started happening in 2020 when you're trying to make sense with everything that's going on. And you're trying to understand, like, what's going on in the world. The evil, the more we've gone on, the more we have seen the evil, and it's becoming more prevalent. Not prevalent, but us understanding it and seeing it more. And so he's naturally calling to all of us. And some people I was listening. I actually was like, okay, now I'm starting to make sense of all of it. And it really he was changing my heart all along the way. I think he does our whole lives, right?
Yeah.
But until we're ready to listen, that's where the big change happens.
It's true. I think that's a good point too, because I've heard a lot of stories of people turning to Christ during 2020.
Yes.
And I think certain things just started to click for people that maybe they might have believed certain things, but they saw a lot that was going on. And like you said, they're making sense of the world.
Yes.
And in making sense, then you start to question sometimes everything or a lot of major things in your life. And you're like, okay, what's going on?
Yeah. And I think honestly, in amidst like everything that happened, I think that's almost a blessing in disguise that a lot of people found Jesus, a lot of people found God and actually started that relationship. And I amidst all the horrible things that happened, I think that that's a beautiful thing that started to come out of it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So I want to move into the next section in a second and just talk about exactly what happened with your accident, what that was, how it happened, and then how that changed your relationship with God even further. On your podcast, you've discussed how you got into an accident, but I'd love to dive deeper into exactly what happened. So you're 32 weeks pregnant and you fall while walking back from getting the mail in the rain. Can you take us back to that moment?
I was literally walking back from the mail, and my husband laughs because I never go get the mail. And it's so in our subdivision, it's right next to our house.
Yeah.
Like literally you can see it. But that day I was handling property tax stuff, you know? And so and it was raining, you know, like not this past year, it had been raining a lot. And so I'm waddling down the street and my foot actually like stuck on a little section of cement that had raised. Wow. And I fell face forward. And,
oh my gosh.
You know, those of you that have been pregnant, you're not going to go like this. Your first instinct is to grab your belly. And so I went face down.
Yeah.
And I had busted open my face. I had a concussion. I literally had Invisalign at the time, was bleeding out of my mouth.
Oh my goodness.
And I had been gone for like 2 minutes, 30 seconds. And when I walked into the house, my husband had been working out in the gym and he's like, what happened? And he looked at my hand. My finger was, so when I had fallen, my finger went like this, like completely vertical, and it pushed into the pavement, and so it jarred. It almost created a mushroom effect, right? So it pushed into itself, and so I went down and up. It was dislocated in 2 places. Oh my gosh! And I was all messed up. I was bleeding everywhere, and I was like, and so my surgeon, he was like, "Are you the scooter accident? This is very severe." I was like, "Nope." I was waddling. And at 32 weeks pregnant, and my son was, when he was finally born, he was 9.5 pounds, 22 inches. He was a very big boy. So you can only imagine I was very large and in charge. And I just went down on that hand and I stood up and my first thought was, my first thought was, my son, is he okay? I was so scared. And I was like, I am a mess. I'm going to literally limp to the hospital, right? So, and I was very lucky because my husband happened to be off. He's a police officer and he's not normally off a lot of times. So I literally limped in there and his first response was, what happened? Like he literally thought I got mugged. This is how bad how messed up I was.
Oh my goodness.
And so, he immediately, because I homeschool, so my children are home all the time. And so, but I'm very, very blessed. My parents live across the street from me.
Oh, that's so good.
He shoved me into the car and because he says, I don't want the girls to see you. You're very messed up. He grabbed them. He's like, come on, girls, we have to go. You have to go over to grandma's. He literally shoved him over to my mom's because he's like, I don't know what all is going on.
Yes.
Well, of course, naturally, my girls were stunned and shocked. My mom had me call them on the way to the hospital because they were like, what's going on with my mom? And my girls are 7 and 5. And so they're aware with it, but they're also like, what's going on? What's wrong with brother? What's happening? Why is mom all of a sudden being rushed to the hospital? So I had to call them on the way and I was like, I am okay. I am going to be okay. We have to make sure brother is okay. And so we got to the hospital and of course I go into the ER and everyone's like, oh, congrats. And then they saw my hand and they're like, no.
like, that's not what's happening.
That's not what's happening. So I was very, very blessed. I went to St. Agnes and I was very blessed because they're like, we don't want you to stay in ER. There's a lot of COVID patients. We need to get you to labor and triage. So they went up there and they were like, what happened? No one believed me either. Yeah. Still, I think in the hospital, no one believed me. They said, you look like someone had really seriously hurt you. I'm like, someone did, myself.
Yeah.
And so we got to labor and triage and they said, we can see your hand is really, really messed up. Yeah. We think you probably have a concussion, but we need to take care of your son first. And I said, 100%, do whatever you need to do for him. So they hooked me up and were monitoring me. And God blessed me so much because he had been head up maybe a week prior, right where I had fallen. Because you could see my stomach was very scraped. I was very messed up. Yeah. And literally when they were doing the ultrasound, they're like, he's head down. Literally the only thing that hit were his hands and his feet. Kind of just, they said he went for a nice roller coaster ride. And so instantly I was like, okay, he's okay. They went ahead and monitored me for 8 hours to make sure I didn't have a placenta abruption or anything. So I was very, very lucky. Had amazing women. And they're like, hey, instead of going back down to ER to handle your hand, how would you feel with us bringing everyone up here and we can reduce your hand here? Yeah. And it's looking like you're probably going to need surgery. So we're going to get in the best position possible and then send you on your way. I did send myself into labor though. So I was in labor. They're like, we also need to monitor. I had contractions 2 minutes apart. Like it looked like he could come at any moment and I was 32 weeks. So like we have to figure out, are you going to try to have him? Yeah. Didn't want to. We're like, well, I'll keep him in. Yeah. And it's funny because everything up until this point, my pregnancy had been really smooth too. Yeah. And I was like, oh, of course I have to mess this one up. But yeah, so in the hospital, everyone was so good. God was really guiding me through it. And they kept saying, do you want pain medication? And in my mind, I'm like, no, because, literally when I started this pregnancy, they actually had taken Tylenol off the roster. You can't even take Tylenol while pregnant anymore. So they're like, do you want this? Do you want that? And I said, nope, I can live with the pain. I do not want to harm him, especially, how close I am. I can live with the pain. Yeah. And so they shot a little bit of lidocaine in my finger because they said your body won't let you reduce it until we put something in it, a numbing agent. And I said, will it go into other? And they said, nope, it's going to stay right here. Yeah. So I let them do that. And they were able to reduce it. It actually it divvied down and it looked kind of flat, but it looked more like a finger. And I was like, okay, that's a blessing. And it was really seamless. I was there for a long time, but it was really seamless. They're like, we already referred you over to a surgeon and you need to call immediately after this. And here it's coming tonight. And I'm like, it's night on a Friday night. Yeah. And luckily I called and they still happen to be open and they got me in for Monday. And it was so interesting how everything lined up and it was quite the trial. And I remember laying in bed that night because they said, you really just take some Tylenol if you need it. And I'm like, nope. Yeah. And I remember I couldn't even sleep with my husband because I was in so much pain that I was like rocking and stuff. So I had my girls sleep together and I slept in one of their beds. And I remember in the middle of the night, I said, God, just take the pain from me. Just take the pain so I can get a little bit of rest. Because it was probably the worst pain and I've had 3 children now. Yeah. It was the worst pain, but also too, with delivery, the pain comes and goes. And it was just constant. And it was so unbelievable. And my hand was so mad. It was so mad. And now today they found that there's still some nerve damage, even though they did everything they can. Yeah. So I did a little bit more. My mom says I always go 100% everything, even my falls. So I just remember telling God, like, please just release this pain, take this from me. And I remember, and it was literally like within 30 minutes of that, it just finally, like everything went away. But yeah, looking back, I'm like, those horrible moments were some of actually the best. And it also too, up until then, I had been running a very busy business. I have over 400 clients. Yeah. I'm very active in my businesses. And it made me stop and say, what do I really want? And how can I simplify? Because I may not always be 100%. And being able to step back and reevaluate everything in my life from this one silly incident.
Yeah.
It really is. Like, everyone's like, you're so strong. I'm like, I just fell and broke my hand. How many people go through such horrible things? But it was a defining moment.
Yeah.
I think it'll always be a defining moment in my life, for sure.
Well, thank God that, like, the pain went away.
Yeah.
Because that's clearly a miracle that happened. And, you know, pain is truly horrendous. Mm-hmm. And when it's to a certain level, and even, you know, there are even points where medication doesn't even help.
Yeah.
Where it's that. And I feel like that sounds like that was the case, even if you were able to.
Yeah, it was such a unique pain. And it was such, like, it was constant too. It didn't go away.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was like, well, you know what? I can just grin and bear it. I can do that. I can, you know, just pray and just give it over. And it was truly amazing. I remember doing it the night of my surgery too, because I did that with no pain medication as well. And don't wish that on anyone being awake. That was not an enjoyable occasion. Yeah. But also it really taught me how strong I can be too when I lean into him to realize. And I remember even thinking while going through it, you know, just like how I brought him into my business, I can also bring him through this too. Yeah. I can give everything over to him through everything. And it was just truly, like I said, the worst moments in our lives sometimes turn out to be the best lessons. Yeah. And just your reminder that, you know, you are one person, but you don't have to control it all. And you actually aren't even in control. Good luck. Like,
yeah. No, it's true. Yes. I think there's like part of that. And I think that's like the flesh part is like, oh, I don't like that. I want to be able to just control things and know in my mind a for sureness that it's going to be fine. And then the other side of it is like, it's going to be fine. Like God has a plan. It's better than the one I'm going to come up with. It's better than I can even imagine it to be.
Yes.
So, okay, it's going to be fine. Like I don't have to do not that you don't have to do anything at all, but you know, you don't have to worry about it. And I think it's a battle of back and forth in moments.
You know, it's amidst the chaos, what is within our control, and then the rest you just give over.
Yeah.
You just give to God.
To kind of like backtrack just a little bit. So you had gone to the hospital and then you had gone home for a little bit, you know, because you wanted to have some time with your family. You didn't want to just be sitting in the hospital. But you were going into labor, but they had told you there was a possibility of getting the surgery at first, and then that kind of didn't happen. Yeah. And then it sounds like maybe you did end up getting the surgery. So what happened there?
So it was a total mess. So I had my I fell on a Friday. I had my consultation on Monday. They're like, we heard about your case. We have to, with this type of break, you only have a certain amount of time. We have to be, it's very timely. So on Monday, I go to the consult. They're like, we're going to schedule you for Thursday. We're going to schedule you for the surgery on Thursday. I'm like, okay, all right. I got to emotionally prepare myself for this. Did everything. I'm in triage. So you have to go into surgery triage. They're monitoring my contractions and they're like, so first off, this is supposed to be an outpatient procedure. You're supposed to go to the hand place. And they said, no, with your case, we're doing this in the hospital. We do not want a baby born in this facility.
We're not prepared for that.
Yeah. And I even had told them, hey, listen, my contractions are 2 minutes apart. I've never had a baby born naturally, but you know, never know. I'd had 2 C-sections prior. Yeah. So I was in the hospital. The OB, so when you're in labor, it's not just you, there's a baby there. So you have to have an OB representing the baby. I had my hand surgeon there and they're monitoring me and they're like, you're not getting this surgery. Nice try. And I'm like, what? I had and listen, to a pregnant woman who is 33 weeks pregnant, not being able to eat all day, even though I had to be awake for the procedure, they said if something goes wrong and we have to put you under, we don't want you to aspirate. Yeah. So literally this poor, hungry, pregnant woman was like, you're not going to give me the surgery after I waited all day. And I was just so overwhelmed. And they were like, and I said, okay, so am I going to have my son? No, they just kicked me up to labor and delivery triage for another 8 hours and then sent me home. And this hand surgeon, I said, listen, I don't think I'm going to have him. I'm feeling very confident. Can we just do this? He said, no, the OB can override me. I would do the surgery. I feel very comfortable about it, but we'll try again next week. And I literally even told him, I won't be in any less labor then.
Yeah.
Literally 2 minutes apart, my contractions were stacked. And so my husband, my wonderful husband, and they still were not letting your spouses in the hospital. He had to drop me off each time.
That was such a difficult time.
And hope and pray. But what was interesting is right before surgery triage, he was able to be there. And then when surgery, he was going to kick me out. So he was able to be with me during that time. Because, of course, naturally, I'm like, I am so stressed out. I am so over. Like, is this going to happen? Are they going to be able to save my hand? So Monday rolls around and they called me and they said, your surgery's on Tuesday. And I was like, okay. They said, but we see you don't have a new COVID test. So if you don't get this COVID test within the next few hours, you're going to be kicked off and not get the surgery again. And the hand doctor then called me and said, Tuesday is your last chance. Because when we looked at your imaging, it's about the last time we can do it without causing even more serious harm.
Oh my goodness.
So naturally, again, I'm freaking out. I'm praying. I'm like, listen, God, like whatever is meant to, if you don't want me to get this surgery, make sure you make it as hard as possible and it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But then things started and they said, we'll do a rapid test and all that stuff. And I was like, I was literally just there a couple days ago and they're like, no, you have to do it all over again. And so I went down there and then my husband was there in triage with me and they're like, okay, we're going to wheel you back. And I had to really, really pray during that time because going into a very cold OR and there's teams of people everywhere because they had to have radiology, they had to have anesthesiology, they had to have someone monitoring my baby the whole time. They had to have the hand surgeon and his team. It was very surreal. And they said, you probably want to bring headphones because you don't want to hear, because they had to drill into my hand. And I'm like, not really enjoying this. So I got in there and it's funny because the x-ray tech when I was in there was like, why is she awake?
Yeah.
She's like, she is not supposed to be awake. And then she looked at my tummy and she's like, that's why you're so awake. And so
you felt everything?
So here's the next thing. The anesthesiologist was like, I'm going to put a block in your neck so your arm is deadened. This is going to keep the baby safe. The problem is once they started poking around, they hit the wrong nerve.
Oh, no.
And I lost my eyesight and my hearing.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes. And I was like, and he said, I'm very sorry. I hit the wrong nerve. And then he eventually it was a lot of stabbings. It was a lot of pokings.
No.
And he finally got it. And it was very scary too because you all of a sudden have this vertigo. Everything's off. Your equilibrium is completely off when you don't. I didn't have. And my husband, even when he picked me up later, he said, "What's wrong?" Because it almost created like a stroke.
Oh.
It was a stroke on one side.
Oh
so my face was all kind of droopy and stuff. And I was lucky enough, my eyesight came back literally the next day. But my hearing, it was weeks. And they even said it should come back.
For both ears?
For this one.
Oh,
for this one. And was because they blocked the left side.
Yeah.
And they said it's only like 5% of the people it doesn't come back. It is back now, but I do lose it from time to time. So it was just a nerve damage.
Yeah.
It might get better over time, but yeah. So he was like, I'm very sorry about that. So, and I'm very, very lucky. That surgery they had projected to be an hour and a half.
Yeah.
It was 6 minutes long.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah, he said, even the surgeon was like, it was a slam. He said this, it's a slam dunk. And I said, well, that's what I want to hear with a surgery. He said, everything's set perfectly into place. I had 2 cross pins and they were going to hold. And then he said, right after your son is born, we'll pull him out. And so it almost didn't happen. And literally a week and a half later, I had a baby.
Yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah, and so timeline was just so unique, and it was in that night too. I went home. They discharged me, and I went home, and in a lot of pain. And I had, I went through the same thing, the same trial. But then, when God's already been there once for you, it's easier to just let go and say, this is short-term pain. I will be okay. And then the next day, my pain I was very, very fortunate. My pain in both situations only lasted about 24 hours. And then after that,
thank God.
Never felt pain again. I went ahead and stayed awake. My son was 2 weeks old when they pulled my pins out. And they were like, do you want to be put under? I was like, I've already been awake for all these, might as well. So they just deadened the area and stripped the pins out because I said I want to go on a date after this.
Yeah.
I want to go eat a good meal, so just pull the pins out. And I was sore, and I think the hardest thing was learning how to handle my new mobility, because that was a challenge in and of itself. They said it was a great surgery, but I have nerve damage. I don't I'd almost waited too long. So my body, to try to compensate, solidified these two joints. And so my primary joint and my secondary, this one is done for too. They said that joint is done. You can't do anything with it. I'm getting some mobility. I'm going to a myofascial specialist because they wanted to do, the surgeon was like, let's open up your hand when your son's older and scrape out and start over. And I was like, I'm okay with limited mobility. I already went through enough. Enduring pain is one thing, subjecting myself is another. And so, but I've been going to a myofascial specialist and she's releasing nerve endings in my arms and I'm getting a lot more mobility and I'm feeling blessed. You know, the worst thing is my finger doesn't work very well. My son is here and he's happy and healthy and wild. I am blessed.
So you talked about before on your podcast a little bit about some depression and anxiety. I'm curious. Okay, so they tell you you're gonna have to be awake, and even as you're awake and you lose your sight, you lose your hearing. How do you keep on going? First of all, not get so much anxiety to have an anxiety or a panic attack.
Yeah,
and then just being, I guess, positive with the whole situation surrounding that.
You know, being a mother will make you rise to the occasion even when you don't want to. I remember there was so many times my husband would take my girls to gymnastics, especially when I was in this much pain. He's like, I'll do everything. You just survive and you get Jackson here. And so I had my moments when they would leave because I was so strong. And I was even telling them, you know, guys, like, you have hard moments in life, but if you have God, like, you have everything. You'll be just fine. I have him. I did not lose him. I was so blessed. And it was a good lesson to me. But then, of course, when they'd leave, I'd go cry. You know, I'd have, you know, I'm still human amidst it all, right? And so, of course, I felt really, really down. There was times where I would feel really down, and it's so easy. I don't know if you could tell this. I'm a very high energy person.
I love it.
High energy people also have a lot of extreme lows, and I've dealt with that my whole life. And I think really God calling to me when he did was preparing me for that hardest battle. For, you know, are you going to let depression win? Are you going to let anxiety win? Or are you going to see it as a challenge to rise? And that's what, when I was like, I am being challenged and I want to rise to this. That was really a pivotal moment for me. And I think he called, and like I said, it had been a progression over a couple of years, but it was really like that defining moment. Like, are you going to lean into God or are you going to go back to your old ways? Because my whole life I've suffered with, you know, bouts of depression, but it's always like, no, I'm not going to let this define who I am. I'm not going to be pulled into I like to like literally picture it as being pulled into the darkness.
100%.
And it's like, I'm going to stand in the light. I'm going to make sure that through my struggles, I'm open and I communicate that. And then I'm also going to show my girls, now my son now, but as well, but my girls that everyone has challenges in their lives. Everyone faces hardship. How you react to that is who you become.
I've had experience with depression and anxiety my whole life, and it's like you said, it's that darkness. And when it gets really bad, I've explained it before, it's almost like a cloud of darkness over your head, and it's like, okay, Lord, like, how do I get out of this, and how do I look to you? Because there are moments, at least I've experienced, where it's like, it's so dark, it's like almost like you're blinded to everything. Like, you feel like, I don't know, like, it feels like you're not even fully there. And so I think, just looking back to Christ and just seeing, okay, like, having joy, because happiness, that's fleeting, right? And it's a worldly standard. But with joy, you can have that even when you're sad. And you can have that when you're having like, things are all good and dandy. You can have it when things are going downhill. And I think that's one of the great things about knowing the Lord is just being able to have joy. And it almost seems crazy to people at times, and especially to people who don't know the Lord, is a couple years ago knew a gentleman, he had a seizure, I don't remember, something had happened and half of his face was like droopy, and I go to visit him in the hospital, and his response is, "The Lord is so good. I'm doing great." And at the time, like, I was a Christian, but I was young, and I was like, huh?
Yeah.
Like, whoa, I'm confused. Like, obviously I understand that you love the Lord and that you're following him, but just to see somebody respond that way to something so extreme, like you literally can't feel your face, you can't move it, it's drooping. And you're saying like, oh, everything's fine, like everything's good, and there's positivity.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just amazing to see when the Lord does that in our situations.
That's when you look at your life overall, you're like, I've had a very blessed, fulfilled life, even in times of darkness, because I wasn't alone. And that's what depression is. Depression is loneliness. Depression is a pain that we sometimes don't even understand. Yeah. I remember like sometimes, because you slip in and out, and sometimes I'm like, I can't even tell you why I'm sad. My husband's like, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, it just comes, and you're like,
just,
okay.
The cloud is here for a couple of days, and I don't let it. I used to, as I was young, I feel like as you get older, you establish wisdom, right? Yeah. Wisdom is gained with time, and I'm like, I'm not going to sit in bed all day long like I used to. I'm going to continue to go through the motions because God will help pull me out of it as long as I keep continuing forward. I'm not gonna, and I always equate like that depression is like, the devil is trying to distract you. Yeah. The devil is trying to come into your world and overwhelm you so that you can't continue forward with your purpose. Yes. And you can't continue forward with your path. And I'm not going to let him do that. Yeah. And so I'll take a day and I'll pull myself back through, and of course, it's not just a day. It takes time, but knowing this is fleeting. This is not my circumstance for good. And I think a lot of people really struggle with, they start leaning into it and they start letting the darkness become them, and then it's harder to find the light again. Yeah. It is.
It's true. And I like what you said about how the devil is trying to stop us from fulfilling that purpose that Christ wants us to fulfill. And I talked about this in the last episode, but basically, the Lord has to allow that to happen. And that's where you see the Lord's purpose for allowing that, whatever it may be, growing you in certain ways, whatever ways those are, it's specific to the situation. But the enemy's purpose for that, and it's so interesting to see that dualship, right? But God's authority is above that. But how his purpose is to just kick us and kick us and kick us while we're already down. Yep. So that we turn away from Christ, so that we turn away from what Christ wants us to do, because what Christ wants us to do, regardless of the situation, is going to bring him glory. And the enemy doesn't want God to get any glory. He wants the glory.
No. And I even had that moment when I'm going through all of this. I even asked myself, can I even do this business? Can I even, I don't even know what my road to recovery looks like. Do I even want to do this? Yeah. But then I looked back to my mission and why am I doing what I'm doing? Because a confident mom raises confident children. And if I can help someone on their road to, and it sounds so simple, right? Organizing your life, but really it's putting the right pieces in place so you can step into and be the best person you need to be.
Just to kind of bring it back to what you said earlier about your hand, the doctor talked about a possible surgery, but you're going for myofascial release. And my friend was actually telling me about that yesterday. Yes. She goes to a doctor like that, or a neuro, whatever it is, and talked about how painful that can be.
Yeah, because you're forcing your hand to do things it doesn't want to do anymore. And the body is such an amazing thing. It will try to heal itself. Yeah. And that's what my body was doing. It's like, it doesn't know that there's going to be a surgery. Yeah. So it was trying to heal itself. So now I have like a lot of scar tissue. Yeah. And what you have to do is you have to break the scar tissue. Oh. And so, of course, a surgeon's going to recommend surgery. Yeah. He's like, we'll open up the back of your hand, keep it open for a few weeks and just scrape out. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah. And the surgeon even said, you have a baby? Probably not the best thing, especially changing diapers and all that. And so I started going to this physical therapist, and she does the myofascial release, and she moves it in ways that are not comfortable, especially because I had nerve damage, and then them sticking lidocaine and shoving, because we have a lot of nerve endings in our hands, them sticking the needles in so many times to try to make it to where they could do what they needed to do. There was a lot of trauma. And the doctor even said, he's like, you can only mess with something so much before it's like, And so, it's breaking up things. It's doing things that your body's like, we're not going to make sure you don't do that anymore. We don't want to repeat what you did. So definitely it's like pushing your comfort zone. And she's really great about it, though. She starts up high because my nerve damage, it radiates up into my elbow, especially with how much I use my hand. So of course I broke my writing hand, but God blessed me. I was born ambidextrous.
Oh, thank God.
That is very unusual. And so I relearned how to write with my right hand. And now I can write I just don't use the finger. I can now write with it. I now try to, I'm pushing my comfort zone to try to get mobility back, but also I'm practicing grace. I'm like, if this is the way my finger, I actually got out pretty unscathed in my opinion, based on what happened. And they even were saying like, this is such an unusual, because any other break, you splint it and you move on. It's the way it had mushroomed and literally like my finger was actually shorter. That's how much I had pinned it.
What in particular keeps you looking toward Christ as you're coming to all these things have come to you and you face them?
I think people's journey with Christ, it isn't just like a straight arrow path, right? And, throughout my life, there had been things where I pray a little bit more, or I keep feeling that nudge like I did in 2020 and kind of saying, you need to kind of explore this. Someone's calling to you. And now the way I am, I'm far more intentional about it. I go and seek him out. I include him. I know before my calls, now I pray and I'm like, guide me, and whatever this person needs, help see them through. He's not an afterthought. He's always at the forefront. And I think that's really where transformation occurs. Going from there's just something in the background of your life to being at the forefront of your life. And that's, do I read my Bible every day? Not all the time. I want to be better about it, but life, and the devil is in the distractions. I'm really good I have ADHD as well. So I'm like, oh, I need to be doing this and I need to do that. And then all of a sudden I didn't have my prayer time and I didn't have my devotional time, but it's like doing better and getting better and putting that intention forward versus it being an afterthought. It's always at the forefront of my mind. And also too, something that I hadn't done before is have that conversation with my girls. We have, we talk often about God now. We have our devotional time, really just embedding him into our daily lives. And then, really being intentional about praying before bed and, first expressing gratitude and then praying for someone or something, or, maybe it's even for ourselves, what we need to have strength through. It really just what I went through made me realize it's not just my journey, but it's my journey to share and then bring my children into it, because my children will know God through me. And I was blessed to have been introduced to God and start that journey. And I want my children to have the same. So it's been an amazing journey, actually.
Praise God for that. Is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
If you're going through maybe the hardest time in your life, just know you aren't alone. God puts people in your life for a reason. I was very, very blessed to have my team keep my business going. And I had started onboarding my team just a year before that, to where when I was down and out and really not in a good place, they kept everything going. No one was the wiser. And so leaning into people that God has put into your life, that's a huge thing. And just giving grace to yourself and letting go of the things outside of your control. That's really what all of last year told me. You're not in control, and you shouldn't even desire to be. Control what you can, manage what you can. And I think that's what the beautiful balance is. It's not just being like, whatever, and I'm not going to do anything, but saying, here's the things I need to be doing and why I need to be doing them to further the kingdom, versus being passive with your life. And then, but knowing and understanding what you need to give over and practice grace with the rest.
That's great. That's great. Praise God. To wrap things up, We discuss the difficulties of the unknown and how in those moments, it's God's way of bringing us closer to himself. Hopefully you were inspired by Lisa's story and see that even when we don't know what's going to happen, the maker of the universe knows, and he has known since before he created anything, before we were born, before we were created. He knows the number of hairs on our heads and has amazing plans for us. Thank you to Lisa for coming on and sharing her story. Follow her on Instagram at the Daughter Diaries, and please like this episode, share it, and subscribe for new episodes every other week. Peace out, Girl Scouts.